Did you know that gas prices are $8.31 in Los Angeles a gallon? $8.31 a gallon. I about lost my mind when I saw the price go up to $3.19.
Millions of Americans are switching to walking rowing boats and even riding broomsticks after seeing the shock at the gas pump. That's right, and this price storm is sweeping across the United States. Videos showing gas pumps climbing past $100 fuel bills, leaving drivers speechless, and complaints about transportation costs are spreading more and more across social media. People are cutting back on trips, drivers are reluctant to accept deliveries, and fuel prices are starting to work their way into every other bill. The confusing part is that America has oil technology and one of the largest transportation systems in the world. So why by 2026 can filling up the tank just one time push an entire family budget to the edge of bankruptcy? Today, let's take a look at what is really happening at gas stations across America. Watch until the end because this price storm is not just costing you a few extra dollars, it could tear your entire family budget apart. I don't think diesel is the lifeblood of the American economy. Who would think it was engine oil? America leads the world in technology, finance, aviation, agriculture, and online shopping. We can order something with a few taps, track it on our phones, and have it delivered right to the front door. Everything looks so modern that it is easy to forget there is still an engine burning fuel behind that shiny app. Look at his face. At first he is really excited about the new vehicle, then the number passes $40, $70, $100, and his smile disappears faster than the money in his bank account. He says, "Please stop, I'm sorry, but the gas pump in the world's largest economy apparently does not take voice commands." Nearly 30 gallons cost him $137.34, and that is only one gas-powered vehicle, not a commercial truck that has to buy hundreds of gallons of diesel just to keep working. Diesel powers long-haul trucks, delivery vans, refrigerated trucks carrying food freight, locomotives, tractors, excavators, construction equipment, and backup generators. The United States Energy Information Administration says most products people use are transported by diesel-powered trucks and trains, and this fuel also powers most of the country's agricultural and construction equipment. Put simply, diesel does not just get the product to the store. In many cases, it helped make the product in the first place. This driver was on the road for more than 1 hour, but received only a $1.19 tip and a small payment from the app. He says the money was not even enough to cover the fuel. This is the bitter joke behind the convenience economy. The customer taps a button and food appears. But the person delivering it has to cover the vehicle fuel and risk, then hope whatever is left is enough to live on. And these are only two very small examples. Search similar terms on social media and you will see countless drivers filming their receipts, counting every gallon and wondering whether the next trip is still worth taking. You may have never held a diesel pump nozzle, but you are almost certainly still paying for diesel through food delivery fees, construction materials, repairs, and every product that has to move. The price on the shelf may not rise tomorrow, but the pressure has already started at the pump. Let's expose the technology lie, the excuse companies use to push oil prices to record levels. People often talk about fuel prices in America as if the whole country is buying fuel at the same price, but it isn't. In America, you can drive the same vehicle, buy the same kind of fuel, and simply cross a state line, then suddenly see the bill change as if you just entered a different economy. Look at the price signs in this clip. On one side is California, where fuel is close to $7 a gallon. Drive just a few more minutes into Arizona and the number immediately drops by a noticeable amount. Hold on, does the fuel across the border taste better? No. Does the vehicle suddenly become more fuel efficient? No. The only thing that changed is your location on the map. I don't know whether to call this a trip to buy gas or a short-term investment strategy. In some areas, people really do drive into the next state not for a vacation, but to save their wallets from a price sign that makes no sense. And this is not random. America is one country, but its fuel system does not operate like one giant pipeline connecting every place together. Each region has different oil sources, different refineries, different storage facilities, and different levels of pipeline access. To put it more simply, crude oil may be bought and sold on the global market. But before it can end up in your vehicle, it has to be refined, transported, stored, and distributed through a system that is highly local. That is why two gas stations located fairly close together can still post two prices that make people check again to see whether they misread the decimal point. California is the clearest example. The state has enormous fuel demand, heavy transportation activity, and a supply system that is relatively isolated from many of America's other refining centers. California cannot simply call Texas and say, "Send us some more fuel before lunch." On the map, it is still part of America, but when it comes to the fuel system, California sometimes operates almost like an island. When a region has more pipelines, more refineries, and more backup sources, a disruption can be covered more quickly. But when the system is isolated, just one refinery going through maintenance, one shipping route slowing down, or fuel reserves dropping, can make prices at the pump react before people even understand what happened. And that is the important part. California is not unusual only because its prices are high. It is unusual because the system behind those prices has less room to absorb a shock. But what makes California a national story is not the amount local residents pay at the pump. The goods moving through California are not only meant for California, and that is when a fuel price on the West Coast starts to matter to consumers living thousands of miles away. High diesel prices in California can affect the supply chain across the entire United States. That sounds a little dramatic, right? What does a driver paying more in Los Angeles have to do with a family shopping in Chicago, Dallas, or Kansas City? I'll tell you why that makes perfect sense. California is not just a place where people buy things. It is also where an enormous amount of cargo begins its journey across American soil. Right there in San Pedro Bay are the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach. Do not picture just a few ships, a few cranes, and a pile of containers sitting by the coast. This area is more like a massive industrial city built to receive goods from around the world, then push them deep into the country. In 2025 alone, the Port of Los Angeles handled about 10.2 million container units and remained the largest container port in the United States. Counting only loaded international cargo containers, the port handled about 17% of the country's total containerized ocean trade. The neighboring Port of Long Beach also handled a record 9.9 million container units that same year. Stop for a moment and think about that scale. We are no longer talking about a few truck trips. We are talking about millions of containers filled with clothing, electronics, toys, parts, furniture, and household goods. And here is the part many people miss. A ship reaching the port does not mean the product has reached its destination. A container that just crossed the Pacific Ocean may still be more than 1,000 miles away from the buyer. It still has to leave the dock, move through the container yard, reach a warehouse, get loaded onto a train or truck, and continue to a distribution center in another state. The ship has already traveled halfway around the world, but the buyer lives in Ohio. The bad news is that the container still has not learned how to drive itself. The Port of Los Angeles has 6 intermodal rail yards directly connected to the Alameda Corridor. About 35% of the port's intermodal containers use this rail network to travel deeper into the country. So when diesel becomes expensive in California, the cost does not stay beside the pump. It travels with the trucks pulling containers, warehouse operations, and shipments leaving the state. An extra $1 per gallon may sound small, but multiply it by thousands of vehicles, millions of trips, and a gateway handling a massive amount of cargo. At that point, $1 is no longer pocket change, it becomes operating pressure. I'm not saying California determines the price of every product in America. Not every item passes through the state, and not every cost is immediately passed on to the buyer. But state borders can only stop laws. They cannot stop a container from carrying costs out of California and into the rest of the country. That is the real concern. One of America's largest gateways for goods is operating in an unusually expensive fuel market. So why is diesel so expensive in such an important place? There is no single culprit, and the answer lies in a chain of causes that are piling on top of each other. So why is diesel this expensive right at one of America's most important gateways for goods? I know the first instinct for many people is to find one name to blame, a company, a law, or some politician. But the truth is much more uncomfortable. There is no single culprit. The price at the pump is where wars, oil tankers, refineries, taxes, and special fuel standards all squeeze into 1 gallon of diesel. The pump does not care who caused the problem. It just adds everything up, then takes the money out of your account. First, there is the global market. The Strait of Hormuz is one of the world's most important energy shipping routes. But on August 5, 2026, shipping data showed that only 2 vessels passed through the strait, compared with 130 to 140 vessels per day before the conflict. When ships are afraid to travel, supply does not just slow down. War risk insurance costs go up, delivery schedules become uncertain, and companies have to pay more just to convince ships to keep operating. A driver in California did not start that war. He does not own an oil tanker either, but through the very special magic of the modern economy, his credit card is still invited to pay the bill. Then there are Russia's oil refineries. Crude oil and diesel are not the same thing. Having oil underground does not mean gas stations have fuel ready to sell. In July of 2026, Russia's seaborne exports of petroleum products fell about 33% from the previous month as several refineries came under attack and fuel output declined. That is why crude oil prices can cool down while diesel still makes people want to scream at the price sign. The raw material may still be there, but the machine that turns it into fuel is having problems. And California entered this shock with very little room to spare. By the beginning of 2026, the state had only 12 refineries left. California's fuel system is also relatively isolated from other major refining centers. When supplies run short, replacement fuel usually has to arrive by ship, and that can take 3 to 4 weeks. Prices can rise in a few days, but the rescue ship takes several weeks. Trucks cannot sit in a parking lot for a month waiting for the market to calm down. Then there are taxes. Starting July 1, 2026, California's rate schedule showed that state diesel taxes came to about 97.9 cents per gallon. The federal diesel tax added another 24.3 cents. For 100 gallons more than $120 was added to the bill before the truck traveled even 1 mile. Finally, there are the state's special fuel standards. They were designed to reduce pollution and promote cleaner fuel. I do not think most people are against clean air. What frustrates them is that these special requirements also mean fewer replacement fuel options, make it harder to bring fuel into the state quickly, and make it more expensive when the market gets tight. No single factor explains the entire price, but when all of them pile onto 1 gallon of diesel, do not be surprised when the driver looks at the pump like it just robbed his bank account. And this is only how the bill gets created. The scarier part is that it does not die at the gas station. It leaves with the truck and starts making its way toward the shopper. The pump just took more money from the driver. But do not think the story ends when he puts the fuel nozzle back. That money does not disappear. It just starts changing hands. The driver and the trucking company take the first hit. They have to buy diesel at today's price, while the shipping contract may have been signed weeks or months ago. Fuel prices go up, but the amount the customer agreed to pay may not go up with them. And trucks do not burn diesel only while flying down the highway. They also burn fuel while stuck in the traffic, waiting in line at a warehouse, waiting for a container to be released, or driving back without a load. In other words, the truck may be burning money even while it is standing still. This is the part that makes many independent drivers furious. They do not own a massive fleet, they do not have a great fuel contract, and they cannot spread the loss across thousands of other trips. When the cost of each trip stays high long enough, the profit can disappear before the wheels even start moving. So what do? They add fuel surcharges, adjust shipping rates, renegotiate contracts, or refuse routes that are no longer profitable enough. The phrase fuel surcharge sounds very professional, but put plainly, it is how the bill leaves the driver and gets placed on the next person's desk. The importer gets it, the manufacturer gets it, the distributor gets it, then the retailer has to decide who will absorb the pain. They can raise prices, reduce promotions, order less inventory, increase delivery fees, cut services, or accept lower profits for a while. Honestly, not every business immediately turns around and reaches into the customer's wallet. Many will try to hold prices steady so they do not lose customers. But absorbing a cost does not mean the cost disappeared. It is just quietly eating into profits until the business cannot take anymore. And that is when consumers start seeing it. Maybe not the next morning. Older inventory is still in the warehouse. Older contracts are still in effect. Some retailers still have enough room to delay the increase. But when the new shipment arrives, the math arrives with it. You may see it in food, clothing, household goods, construction materials, imported products, delivery fees, or the cost of local services. The bitterest part is that shoppers almost never see a line that clearly says, "You are paying more because of diesel." They just see a more expensive box of cereal, a higher delivery fee, fewer promotions, or less product for the same amount of money. A higher price at the pump today does not mean every product will cost more tomorrow, but it does mean a new cost has entered the system and is looking for someone to pay it. And that is why people are not only upset about the bill at the gas station, they understand that they may have to pay that money again at the store. At this point, the story is no longer just on the price sign, it has gone straight into people's emotions. I have read a lot of comments about diesel prices, and the most obvious thing is the anxiety. People are not only afraid that their next fill-up will cost more, they are afraid delivery prices will rise, food prices will rise, a small package traveling halfway across the country will cost more, then familiar products start getting more expensive, smaller, or offered with fewer discounts. That is what makes people the most frustrated. Whenever there is a war, a shipping disruption, or a refinery problem, consumers are usually the last to hear the news but the first to receive the bill. Businesses may say they are trying to hold prices down, but people also understand that they cannot keep taking losses forever, and that is where the argument begins. One group blames taxes and overly strict regulations. They argue that fuel prices are already high, but every gallon gets loaded with too many extra charges. They also worry that refinery closures or conversions are making the supply system weaker and weaker. From their point of view, California has created a system that is too expensive and too difficult to manage when something goes wrong. I understand that frustration. When you are standing at the pump watching your money move faster than the fuel flowing into the tank, you do not want to hear a long lecture. You just want to know why you have to pay so much. But another group is suspicious of oil companies. They believe companies are taking advantage of the crisis, using shortages as an excuse to keep prices high and protect profits for shareholders. To be clear, this is public suspicion, not a proven conclusion, but the feeling is still very real. Because every time prices rise, people hear the same line, the market is unstable. When the market calms down, prices do not always fall as quickly as they went up. Honestly, that delay is exactly what destroys trust. Some people want to reduce dependence on diesel. They propose electric trucks for shorter routes, hybrid vehicles, railroads, solar power hydrogen engines, and electrifying port operations. That sounds very reasonable, but another group immediately asks who will pay for the new trucks? Where will small businesses get the money? Can the power grid handle it? Can electric trucks cover every long-distance route? And they have a point, too. Moving too slowly keeps people dependent on expensive fuel, but moving too quickly could shift the costs onto the same small businesses that are already exhausted. Whether they blame taxes, oil companies, or the energy system, most people still agree on one thing. When fuel costs rise, everyone can argue about who is responsible, but consumers are usually the ones who get the final bill. Maybe that is why gas station price signs cause such a strong reaction. People understand that the number they are looking at does not belong only to the gas station. When we look at the price sign at a gas station, most of us think about the cost of getting to work, filling up the tank, or the family budget for that week. But behind that number are also transportation costs, food prices, delivery fees, construction materials, imported goods, and the vulnerability of the supply chain. Diesel is an input cost for the economy. Fuel prices vary because America does not have one single supply system. California stands out because of its high prices, limited replacement options, and major role as a gateway for goods. When an international shock hits, those weaknesses become even more obvious. I am not saying California is raising the price of every product in America. But high diesel prices there are putting additional pressure on an important part of the supply chain, and that pressure can travel with goods into many other states. That is the paradox. America has plenty of oil, but crude oil refineries, pipelines, taxes, and distribution systems are completely different links in the chain. What happens at the gas station does not end when the nozzle is put back. It can keep traveling through highways, warehouses, distribution centers, and eventually show up on the bill of a family living thousands of miles from California. How have diesel prices or delivery fees changed where you live? Subscribe to the channel, and I will see you in the next video.